Hi guys, welcome to the show again. Why I love Twin Peaks, and we're back with uh, a person who actually worked on the show and worked on several other projects with David Lynch, i.e., Fire Walk with Me and Wild at Heart. Um, and obviously talk about those as well as other aspects of his career and whatever he would like to fill us in with. Um, so please welcome musician Kinny Landrum. How are you, Kinny?
Hi. Great. I'm doing fine.
Great stuff. Right. My first question before we begin is the name Kinney. How did that
Oh,
come about? Because you're known, your first name is Robert. I'm just curious
my
how the Kinney came
it's
into it.
it comes from my middle name, which is
Right.
Kincaid,
Ah, right.
Scottish, I believe.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
and I'm Junior. I'm Robert Kincaid Landrum Junior. So it's what my parents came up with the way is telling me and my dad apart. Um, it's short for Kincaid, is where it comes from. Um, and at some point when I got older, I thought, I don't know if I'm going to keep it, but it's turned out to be very useful in the age of the internet because you don't get a lot of false hits. Nobody has that name. There actually is, believe it or not, one guy in, of all places, Kentucky, where I originally came from, although he's in Bowling Green and I came from Lexington, but he has the same name. And, but other than that, so having, and if they call me Robert or Kenny, Kenny, I know they don't know who I am. you know that kind of thing. And but of course, on my passport and my driver's license and all that, it says Robert Kincaid Landrum Jr. That's where it comes from.
And you are, I have to, I will say this, it's a confessional. You are the only Kinney I've ever met so
Okay,
far.
well, that's
Yeah,
that's not surprising to me. Yeah.
yeah. That's it. It could be. It might start. It might start a thing. Yeah, maybe I'll meet another Kinney at some point. I don't know, but you definitely are the first in my life. Yeah.
Every now and then on record credits and stuff, I see Kenny, which of course is incorrect, but as long as the check clears, I don't necessarily care.
That's the most important thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Right, right,
Um,
right.
so Kinney, I got to ask you, were you from a musical family?
I'm from Lexington, Kentucky originally,
Yeah.
but actually, no. I mean, my sister played piano before I did, actually, but um, no, neither of my parents were particularly musical, although they always loved music. I mean, I remember well, like listening to my dad's, Frank Sinatra and big band records, and I liked them. And that, but no, we didn't necessarily have any musical background.
Did you study music?
Yes,
You did.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. At India, well, for a year and a half, I went to Indiana University, which is a well-known, actually big-time music school. Of course, for me, that's just one from Kentucky. That's only about 4 or 5 hour drive at one state over. Um, in fact, just as a little aside, my roommate at Indiana is now a very famous jazz drummer, a guy named Jeff Hamilton who plays with Diana Krall and other people. Has its own bands, trio and big band. But after a year and a half of going to school in Indiana, I actually made some recordings that got me a record deal, or more precisely, what you would call a publishing and production deal with a famous New Orleans rhythm and blues producer songwriter named Alan Toussaint. You may have heard of him. Um, People pronounce his last name differently, Toussaint, Toussaint. He pronounced it Toussaint, but that's uh, and so I moved there. I stayed in school at LSU there, but I actually did not. It was not in music school. I just got a business degree, and actually, when I went to LSU, which was in Baton Rouge, which is about 80 miles from New Orleans, um, one of the guys in my band was a guy named Randy Jackson. You may know who I'm talking about. Was on the original American Idol. He was the bass player in my band. There were a lot of great musicians down there. You know, I worked with the Meters when I was down there. I, New Orleans is sort of a musical, spiritual home for me, if you will. I guess.
It's also a very big. I don't know if it still is, Kinney. I've no idea, but it used to be huge for jazz, wasn't it? New
Oh
Orleans
yeah,
jazz, yeah. Dixieland jazz and
well,
stuff. Yeah,
the
um,
business there used to be in the 50s and early 60s
yeah.
was it was one of the hotbeds of pop record or pop R&B record. I mean, remember Fats Domino, and then of course all the greats like Professor Longhair and Dr. John, and notice that every one of these that I'm mentioning are all piano players. Piano was always, it is basically the instrument of New Orleans R&B, you know. And so there was a lot to learn down there. It was just soak it up, that's all.
There was a time when it must have been really buzzing there. All the bars
There,
and the
it,
atmosphere and everything. Yeah,
it,
yeah.
it, it probably was. I mean, when I got there in the early 70s, we're talking 73, 4, 5, um, eh, Toussaint had a well-known big-time studio where people like Elvis Costello and Paul McCartney and others came to record, and he was had numerous hits like "Yes We Can" and "Southern Nights" and other things like this. But that was about the extent of the business in New Orleans at that point. It was not uniform all over the place. Um, and after I left in '76, I don't. I more or less sort of stayed in touch. I don't know what was going on down there really.
So when did you kind of from learning and kind of like stu from going from studying to kind of gigging and so on, and when did you kind of move into the professional
All right. Well,
side of things?
here's the story. I'll make
Go
it as
on,
brief as
go
possible.
on.
In 1976, like February ish, I had graduated from college technically in the previous December. I was still living in New Orleans, and I still had a deal with Alan Toussaint, and Alan Toussaint's business partner was a well known guy named Marshall Sehorn. Um, and I went into Marshall Sehorn's office one day. I think I read in Rolling Stone, believe it or not, that a, a, a great British singer, Robert Palmer, I know you know who I'm talking about, was going on the road. He had made his first album called Sneakin' Sally Through the Alley in New Orleans at that studio. I didn't meet him. I had no contact with him at all. But I went to Marshall Sehorn and said, here I am, a 22-year-old kid, so I think, I don't know what the business is about. I go and he say, do you think he might need a keyboard player for his tour? This is the honest to God truth. And Marshall says, well, I don't know, but I'll call Island Records and find out. And literally 5 minutes later, less than 5 minutes, the secretary that answers the phone there said, Robert Palmer's on the phone and wants to talk to you right now. And Robert says, can you come to New York? And I said, well, I have the time. I can't really afford a plane ticket. He said, that's okay. I'll pay for it. I said, I'll be there. Tomorrow? Yes, tomorrow. I even parked my car at the New Orleans airport which meant I had to. Anyway, I go up there, and I knew he had at that point he had records out called "Sneak and Sally Through the Alley," and then a second album called "Pressure Drop." That had both of these are great records, by the way. If you haven't heard them, you should. Um, the second album was done. First album was done partly in New York and partly in New Orleans. Um, and the second album was done with Little Feat, another one of my favorites, whom I found out about through Alan Toussaint. That's another story. Anyway, um, I go in, so I knew these records. So I come into what is ostensibly an audition at a rehearsal studio in New York, and play about 5 minutes on a couple of tunes, and he said, "You're hired." And I then went on the road with Robert Palmer for about 2 months, well, including rehearsal, etc. In fact, I recommend this to your listeners. It just happened that if you go to Spotify and some other streaming services, though not Apple Music for whatever reason, they have just put out a recording from that tour called um, "Get Yourself Get Away Clean," which is a lyric from "Sneak and Sally Through the Alley." Tried to get away clean. Anyway, um, and I'm on it. There were two keyboard players on that tour because there were so many keyboard parts to handle. Uh, I'm the guy who's playing the Rhodes. This is before there were such a thing as sampled pianos. We were talking about there wasn't such a thing as sampled pianos, and we didn't have a piano on stage. So I played Rhodes and an ARP Odyssey synthesizer, and a guy named Jimmy Smith played organ and a different ARP synthesizer. And between us, we had, like in a sort of U shape, a clavinet with a ARP string ensemble. That was the thing that, the fake strings of those days. And we would sort of share that depending upon who was doing what on what song. Um, but mostly any Rhodes you hear and much of the clavinet is me actually, and that thing just came out. I think what happened, we did a little nosing around that it was at the Bottom Line. You may have heard of the Bottom Line. It was the sort of New York showcase nightclub at that point, and the Bottom Line is now starting in dribs and drabs to release their archives, and I think that's where it comes from. But it's very good. We this was the last gig of the tour, and it showed in the sense that we were very tight. We played loosely in the sense that we were free, but we knew exactly what each other was going to do, so it fit together. So that's how I got started. When that was over, um, the guy who was the ostensible contractor for that gig is another famous musician who's still around named Bernard Purdie, a very famous drummer. Played on Steely Dan records, played on Aretha Franklin, played on a million things. Uh, Many of your viewers will know exactly who Bernard Purdie is. Um, and he said to me, he liked the way I played. He said, "Would you come to New York and work for me?" So that's how I ended up in New York. That's the long story of how I from New Orleans to New York.
Now, um, that kind of brings me. It kind of has a segues in a sense. Yeah, now
Yeah.
you're in New York, and now I know that Angelo Badalamenti was from New York, or
Yes.
certainly lived there, or
Correct.
certainly lived there. I don't know if he was
Yeah.
native New
No,
Yorker,
no,
but
he's from Brooklyn. Yeah, he's from what
Brooklyn,
they call Bensonhurst is a well-known,
right? Yeah,
mostly Italian area of
yes, yes. Oh,
Brooklyn.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Uh, um, so, Kinney, bringing it into bringing it into the Twin Peaks world now. Would it have been? I mean, I'm just interested how you were either approached or auditioned to take
Well,
part.
that's a
Was it something
simple.
connected with Angelo? Because you're in New York. Was there anything
No.
like that? No,
That,
no.
that's a simple answer. The
Right.
recording engineer, Art
Uh,
Polhamus,
Ah, okay.
did all the Twin Peaks recording,
Yeah,
recommend. Angelo said, "Do you know a good synth player?"
right.
By that point, although I am a piano player and started a piano player and remain a piano player, I because there was a unique point in keyboards around 79, 80, when polyphonic synthesizers came out, meaning in my case it was a Prophet 5. There was a famous synthesizer. I bought a Prophet 5, and a Prophet 5 was called a Prophet 5 because it could play 5 notes, which was a big deal in 1979 when most synths played 1 note, right, at a time. Um, and so it meant two things. It meant you actually had to be a pretty decent keyboard player to play with five fingers at once, right? Number one, number two, that implied that you were a decent reader too, a music reader. So a lot of synth players who were technicians but not necessarily great players sort of fell by the wayside, and that's kind of how I established my niche in the New York business. Um, but that this is 10 years later. This is 1990 or 89, I guess, because it was for the Julie Cruz record album that was actually released before Twin Peaks ever came about. Um, Angelo had hired Art Polhamus and his studio called Excalibur to record in, and he said, "Do you know a good synth player?" And Art Polhamus said, "Yeah, call Kenny Landrum," and that's how I got the job.
The sessions would have been in '89. Yes, is that right?
I think the floating into the night sessions were in
Yeah.
'89. Yes, I believe. Yeah.
And I know some of those songs made their way into Twin Peaks as well, because on Floating into
Yes.
Night there was
Yeah. In
vocal
fact,
there was
the
vocal versions, and
theme
then they did instrumental versions of the same sort of song. So they got used a few times. Yeah.
Yeah, the theme is in fact a song called Falling, but with no vocal on it. And when they actually came to use it on the uh, TV show, they had to supply some. They had to put some melody. Melodies were now missing because there was no vocal on it, and I did some with a French horn, a sampled French horn on my emulator too, and some others with other keyboard parts, and that's what ended up being the theme song. Yes, it's just it's just a vocal song with a few instrumental parts added.
And that's interesting because I know over the two seasons, as it were, of the
Yeah,
original Twin Peaks, they
yeah.
use variations of themes, like with different instruments. That they might do
Oh, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
a sax solo type version, to
Mm-hmm.
fit whatever kind of mood was going on. So there was many variations throughout.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, do you remember any of were you involved in that part of it? Because apparently Angelo had like a library of maybe 200 or 300 different things that he could just grab and they could utilize into the
Well, that's
series.
true, but
Yeah.
it depends upon what you're actually. For instance, when you mentioned the saxophone,
Yeah.
almost all the saxophone on that show is played by a guy named Al Regney, who's still
Ah,
around down in Virginia.
yeah,
Great
yeah.
guy, great player too. He was sort of like the on-call saxophone player for the New York Philharmonic. Now, Philharmonic music doesn't use saxophone but it does every now and then. Ravel, uh, he, the famous saxophone stuff on West Side Story, when they would do that, he would be the guy that they would call in to do that, and that. The what is known as, well, different times it's called Audrey's Dance, and it's called Dance of the Dream Man. It's all the same track, just with different saxophone solos, and those are all Al Regney. But yeah, it's very common in films. In fact, film or television should have repeats of themes and sounds, because that's what gives it continuity. That's what says to the listener or the viewer that what you're watching now has some relation to what you watched earlier. You know, that there's a way of tying things together. And so there's no problem with reusing themes and reusing tracks. They do that all the time. I think that's the right way to do it, actually.
Now on the original, the very famous opening theme.
Yeah. Hmm.
I mean, not the vocal version, obviously the Twin Peaks
Yeah, I
opening
understand.
theme.
I understand.
Um, wait, did you play on that?
Yes, that's all. In fact, everything you hear is me, with one minor exception. There's a little bit of brushes played on a cymbal by Grady Tate, another great drummer,
Oh, Grady Tate, yeah, yeah, yeah.
One of
Mm,
the great New York drummers,
mm.
um, and um, and that's it. It's all keyboards and it's all played by me. Even, of course, the twangy bass guitar thing, which is a whole nother story in itself, and I can tell that if I've told it a million times, but I'm glad to tell it again if you want to hear it.
What I'll ask you is maybe about that to elaborate on that.
Yeah.
Is that because it's so recognizable that doom doom, it's
Yeah.
everyone thinks of
Hmm.
that. Was that a guitar or was that a keyboard sound that was used?
No, it's a sample on my emulator too.
Okay.
Uh,
Yeah.
Although I think at some point a really great guitarist who's not with us anymore, named Vinnie Bell, who did play on a lot of Twin Peaks stuff. I did not play on the theme, but they may have doubled me with him, but and either used it or not. Frankly, when I hear it, it sounds just like my emulator 2 sample with some reverb added. That's all it sounds like to me. Um, you want to hear that story? Because it's actually an illustrative story. Um, in fact, I actually told it to David Lynch's son, Riley, a few years, more than a few, 10 years ago, whatever, when Angelo, out in LA, I went to play for some events, and Angelo got a Lifetime Achievement Award from ASCAP, and we were all at the table together. And I was literally sitting next to Riley, and then David was on the other side. And I told this story with David listening, and I'll tell it now. I've told it many
Just to
times
cut in,
before.
Kenny, just quickly about Riley. He
Yeah,
became a musician himself as well,
I think so. That's
and
why
he
I told him the
on
story. Yeah.
yeah, and there's a connection with obviously other than being David's son. Um, Riley also in season three when it came back in 2017,
Yep. Uh-huh.
they did all these road they did all the performances in the Roadhouse,
Right. Okay.
and each episode it was a bit different the format because each episode in the new season would end with a performance in the Roadhouse, and then the
Right.
titles would come up, and they'd have different
Right.
bands in there and all that. And
Yes.
one of the bands that were playing this instrumental song was one of the guys in the band was Riley.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Is he a
so he did
drummer?
appear.
Is he
Yeah.
a drummer?
No, he was playing
I have that
guitar.
right. Oh, he
He
called
was playing
guitar.
he was
Okay.
playing
I'm sorry.
guitar. Yeah.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. I couldn't remember. Right.
I
Okay.
mean, they were
Right.
miming. I mean, it was it was a mime
Right. I
performance,
understand. Of course, that
but
there are very good reasons for technically for miming,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
we could go into that later. Anyway, go
But
ahead.
what's really just very quickly, what's really fascinating about those Roadhouse sequences, there was 18 episodes in this series, and they did about 15 performances for the Roadhouse on it,
Okay.
and all of that was shot by David in one day.
Oh, no
One
kidding.
day, one day. He
Well,
turned
that
all
got
that around. It must have been planned to the absolute nanosecond how they did that. I
well.
do not know. Every
Well,
single
when I tell
performance,
you,
they had to take one band off, then put another one in and start. All that is incredible.
one of the
Um,
things you'll see from my I'll tell this story about
yeah, but
the
please
the
continue,
bass
Kenny.
guitar
Yeah,
thing
I won't
because
interrupt now.
it is illustrative. It's illustrative of the fact that David doesn't waste time and knows what he wants, but also gives people freedom to create within that structure. Here's the story. So we're doing the Julie Cruz record, Falling, and we've basically finished the track. I don't I don't know if the vocals were recorded yet or not. Possibly not, but at any rate. And David says, out of the blue, which is kind of took me aback a bit. He says, "Can you put something on this that sounds 50s?" This is what he says. And I started thinking, what could I do? Meanwhile, by the way, Angelo, who's the boss, right, is like looking off into space like it's your problem, not mine, right? Anyway, uh, uh, I thought, I could put one of those like triplet piano things up in the upper register that would be kind of illustrative of the 50s, but that's kind of corny. And I said, David, I have this like twangy sort of Dwayne Eddy. You know who Dwayne Eddy was, right? A sort of twangy Dwayne Eddy kind of guitar sample. And I thought to myself that there wasn't any real bass part on the recording. There were low notes in the bass register from both the piano and strings, but there wasn't any independent bass part per se on the recording. And I said I could play that on the. Let's try that. And so I get it up. It was a for the nerds who knew anything about Emulator 2. It was on a I had gotten it on a floppy disk in one of these swap beats, so I don't even know where it actually came from. The sample. It was just one sample that was pitch shifted over 2 octaves, and something that people don't do much, but in those days that was the only way to do things. Anyway, I said, I'll play it in the bass register instead of. It's like a low note on the guitar, but I can play it down not an octave, half an octave. Instead of an A, I'll play an F, that kind of thing. And I played dong, 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 and Lynch said, "That's it, put it down." No, no, I don't know, or what else you got. This is the normal things you get from producers who don't know what the heck they're doing. Gee, I don't know what else you got. That's the kind of thing you usually hear. And I believe it was one take. I maybe I did a punch in. You know what a punch in is, where you go in and re-record just a fragment of the recording if there's a mistake or something. But I don't think so. And I thought of it as if I were, playing a like what guitar players I now know. I didn't know this at the time. What Dwayne Eddy played was what they call a baritone guitar. It was actually pitched. Well, there are two different things. You can get a electric bass guitar, not as the company called DeArmond that played a whole octave lower, but the as I understand it, the baritone guitars are tuned either a fourth or a fifth lower than a regular guitar. Other than that, they're just like a regular guitar, and that's in fact what I was doing. And one take and it's done, including the vibrato in it. I added that electronically within the emulator 2 using something called amplitude modulation. Anyway, that's how it ended up on the. And to me, what that shows is how good David is at number one, allowing creativity, but also knowing it when he's got it, and not hammering it to death. And that's why he could do 15 takes in one day. I can believe that that's possible. That's the way he worked.
That's a great story, Kenny. Because I mean, people may have. I don't know about how many people that listen to this would be familiar with that story.
Right.
Many people
I've
might have
told
heard.
it before, but
They may
yeah,
have heard it for
that's
the
right.
first time. So it's good to. It was good for you to share that. I appreciate that. That was really interesting.
Oh, and I
Yeah.
might add, when I told the same story to Riley there it was actually in the Beverly Hilton, the same place they do the Golden Globes. Anyway,
Ah,
David smiled,
yeah.
which he doesn't all the time, and so that meant he heard
There was
what
a
I was saying.
yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right.
Um, I'm going to ask, is that the same? I might be getting this wrong, but when you mentioned about that you can show me as well, Kenny, you said you would show me this, the
Okay,
Emmy nomination you got.
right. Yeah, there's well. Actually,
Was it a
what I
nomination or
what
was
I,
it a win? Sorry, I had to clear this up with you. Did you just nominated or did you actually win the award?
uh,
Uh,
as I understand it, I know Angelo was nominated for an Emmy,
yeah,
but did not win because I remember it was something like crazy, like no, I don't. Maybe it was like Murder She Wrote or something, or one, and I
yeah.
was, but I'm talking about the Grammy Award
The
that
Grammy,
he
sorry, the
did
Grammys.
win.
Yes, yeah,
He
yeah.
did win a Grammy Award for Best Pop Instrumental Performance, and yes, I can show
Yes.
you. I have a certificate from that. There's a story that goes along with that, but I also have the gold record from which they gave me a copy of,
Oh,
um,
nice.
from
Yeah.
from the recording of the soundtrack recording.
Of the original soundtrack album. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
That's
right.
right. Yeah.
But that is what, in fact, he won a Grammy for.
He
Yes,
did win a Grammy. That's right. I do remember he won an award. I was confused whether it was
and
the
I
Golden Globe.
was there in the room. It was
Yeah.
when the Grammys were in New York. Nowadays, they mostly only do them in L.A.
Ah,
But it was at Radio City,
right.
and I remember. I don't know. Well, I'm gonna say the story anyway. He gets up on stage. He wins the award and goes up on stage. And this was a pre-telecast award. You know how they do a lot of the awards are done before they ever go on the air. Uh, and he thanks his lawyer and his agent and everybody else in the world, and he doesn't thank me from the stage. He also didn't thank Art Polhamus, the recording engineer, who I think deserved the same amount of recognition. And basically, other than those brushes, it was for best pop instrumental performance. That's technically what the award says. Um, Not composition. You understand? This is a performance award, not a composer award. Um, and I got kind of bent out of shape about that, and I actually went to a lawyer. This was also, I might point out, the year after Milli Vanilli, which was, of course, a huge scandal about these guys not actually performing on the record that they were
That's right.
winning
They
an
never
award for.
sung on the record. It was some other singers, and they were
Right,
miming to it. Yeah, yeah,
right. So,
yeah.
similarly, I'm basically the only one you hear on the theme, and I didn't get. So they gave me a certificate, and that's what I can show you. Saying that I was involved in the production or something like that. Um, anyway, that was a bit of a problem between me and Angelo. All he had to do was thank me from the stage, and he didn't.
That's, that's a little unfortunate. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
shame.
Anyway,
Yeah. Um.
but we can continue to work together, etc. So, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Um. So after, is there any other particular music parts that you remember that you played on the series
Well,
was definitely
yeah,
it was you. You know, if you hear it, you go, ah, there's Kinney. You know, yeah,
one of the things, not it was it was never released on the soundtrack, but later, they put out, on the internet. You could download certain, what did they call it, Twin Peaks archives or something like that, other recordings that they had done, and I particularly loved doing this because it was. I'm always kind of a history and Civil War buff. I liked it. There was the scene where Ben Horne is reenacting the Battle of Gettysburg on a, like, ping pong table, right, with little soldiers, et cetera, et cetera. And this is all completely historically accurate. He's talking about Joshua Chamberlain, the first Maine, or what it is, defending Little Round Top. And so, Angelo, we needed to come up with something that sounded military, and it was just the two of us in the room. Well, the three of us: Angelo, Art Polhamus, and me. And I actually played this because I was a drummer at Indiana University before I was a keyboard player technically. Well, I did both at the same time, but I actually played the marching snare drum that you hear on that live on a snare drum, and then also played there's a pickle, like a fife kind of thing, and some trumpets and a few other things that are all sampled. But that, in fact, that was one of the most fun things I ever had. I think they call it. I think in the archives it's called Ben's Battle or something like that. Okay, that I had a lot. And the other cue that I loved that they call, by the way, in movies and television, they call a piece of music a cue. Did you may know this? Um, I don't know why. My guess is it's like a holdover from stage work, if you know what I mean. Because if you
Well, they
ever
used to
play
say like
show,
ready. They used to say like ready and cue music. Remember
right?
that
Exactly,
that kind of thing. So it
exactly.
must
So,
come in, yeah, somewhere into
right,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
So they call it a cue, not a song, not whatever you call it a cue. But one other cue that I loved was burning down the sawmill, the whatever, the lumber yard or whatever they were burning down.
Oh, sorry, the Packard Mill,
Yes,
Packard.
that's
Yeah,
exactly right.
yeah,
Mill. That's the word.
the
That's
mill.
what
Yeah.
word I'm looking for. Yeah, and that was very Mission Impossible esque. It was. I had fun doing that particular cue. And the third thing that I'll tell you about is that I guess is in the archives, but was never released per se as a separate recording. The third thing I'll tell you about is when you find, in the famous scene when you finally know who killed Laura Palmer, that you know that it was her father. You see the basically he throws Maddie. That was that the name of the, yeah, the it was the
Maddie.
same,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah, but
the
it
same
was Cheryl
actress,
Lee, the
but
same
yeah.
actress, Cheryl Lee, with a
Right,
wig,
right.
with a
And
blonde.
he throws her up against the wall and maybe even kills her. I don't remember. But that's when he says, "Go back to Missoula, Montana," and throws her against the wall. Well, you what's part of that scene is you see later a vinyl record where it had gotten stuck on the outgroove and didn't reject and kept going over and over again. But while the whole thing was happening, there's no music, but there was music that Angelo and I recorded for that. And as I recall, it was my idea. I said, "We now know who killed Laura Palmer, right? We've solved that quote unquote mystery. I think we should take and it looked like he was dancing with Maddie. Of course, he's murdering her, but it looked like a dance. I said, I think we should do the Laura Palmer as a theme, as a sort of twisted waltz, and that should accompany this whole scene up to the point that he throws her against the wall and you go back to the record. And we did it and we recorded it and we sent it. They hadn't asked for it, but Angelo went along with me and it took hours, it was not simple. And and they never used it in the show. I was always disappointed that they never used it, but
The only thing I
it
remember
exists.
that you had on that in that scene, apart from the sort of atmospherics from the the record player, that going
Right.
around, but there was just underneath it, I think, a slight, maybe that was Angelo, I don't know, but there was a slight sort of uneasy synth part just just underneath there was a sort of like a drony
Maybe,
kind of, just to
maybe,
sort of
but
heighten it a little bit. Yeah, yeah.
what we did was far more composed. It was it had more musical thing going on. Um, he one of the things you referred to when you said he had like 200 or 300 cues that he could bring up at any point. He did. David and he called this firewood, which I thought was a funny idea. Somehow he had done some recording with an actual orchestra in Prague years before Twin Peaks for some other project. I'm not sure what. And he had these recordings, and what they would do is they would purposely play them back on a reel to reel tape machine at half speed. And that's what gave it the weird sort of vibe because it's all playing half as fast and an octave lower. Um, and I had nothing to do with that stuff. Some of that is in the on the soundtrack album on a cut called "Nightlife in Twin Peaks." I think is one of the cuts on there. I believe that's where you hear some of that. They call firewood. So that may have been under that. It's possible. Um, that would have been their call, or more precisely, Lynch and the film mixers call. Anyway, that's what they did. That's where some of that came from.
I think that possibly, and I could be wrong about this, Kenny, but I think but when you mentioned about the Prague thing,
Yeah.
that could be Blue Velvet. That
Yeah,
that
okay,
record
that makes perfect
because that
sense.
was that was
That
pre Twin Peaks. Yeah,
well, then that would
yeah,
make perfect sense. Yeah, you're
yeah.
probably right. You're probably right.
Because there's a track on there that again they reused, but a few years later on with Julie again. But it was a different version, a bit slower. I think it actually appeared on Blue Velvet. Right. I know you had some association, and please let me know what your input was to Wild at Heart.
Yes, yes. I
So
actually
what would
more than
what
some.
would that have been? Was it a particular songs or
Well,
that you?
yeah. You were asking about Cool Cat Walk.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, that is my sampled bass, and I actually that's another case where I played actual not drums but sticks on a wooden stool. We literally mic'd the stool, and I played. So it kind of sounded Ricky Tick, like an old, like playing on the rim of a drum that they used to do back in the old days, or maybe a woodblock, something like that. Um, I am playing that. I don't remember what else is on there, but I remember playing the sticks on Art's wooden stool. And also the one I always liked, and it had been reused, and I even or more precisely, orchestrated it for when Angelo got an award from the World Soundtrack Awards. They did a recording with an orchestra of all this stuff, including Twin Peaks. And I wrote the orchestral arrangement for the two Twin Peaks things, which were the Laura Palmer theme and the main theme, and for this other piece from Wild at Heart that was called Dark Spanish Symphony. And in the original, I can tell you a story about that. I know these things can go on, but it's kind of funny. That was all done with sampled strings using mostly my what would have back in those days an Akai S1000 sampler, and you could and I had pre-programmed it all into my Mac computer so that all as if it were a string orchestra, i.e., separate first violins, separate second violins, violas, cellos, basses. That's it. And there may have been a little timpani, but that was basically all it was string. But I had pre-recorded all the parts into the computer so that all five of these parts or more would play back simultaneously. We later then had to record them to tape. In those days, even if you could, have multiple parts in the computer playing via MIDI, you really couldn't record multiple audio streams at one time. Uh, and you had to use tape to really mix it because Pro Tools was in its infancy at that point. And so we in fact did it, but Lynch came in. Here's the story. I had prepared all this, and Angelo was fine with it. And David came in, and actually, he's right. Insightfully, he said, it feels a little stiff. And that's because when you're working with multiple parts and you're recording one at a time, you got to have some kind of time reference. And so you use a click track. And even though I didn't quantize it, that means you make it fit the grid. Yes, I played to a click track. And therefore, it can sound a little stiff because it doesn't slow down and speed up like an ordinary orchestra might do with a conductor. So here's the story. So I was using a piece of software called Vision, and it had the ability to tap in a recording of i.e., you tap on a key and you're basically changing the tempo by tapping the key. So I said, well, then, David, what we should do is I should tap the key, and therefore I can make it speed, and Angelo should conduct me. So, so you got this scene of Angelo conducting like this, like a real conductor, like he was conducting a string orchestra, and all I'm doing is tapping a single key, recording the taps while I'm doing it. But that meant that the taps and the pre-recorded parts would follow the conductor. There's a little lag. It was not quite as robust as it is now, but that's what you hear. That's how we did it. And it was because David said it sounded a little stiff. Or I don't know if that was the exact word, mechanical, I don't know, whatever. And he wasn't wrong, but there was really no other way to do it technically but to use a click track and then re-record the tempo. Basically, becomes a manual metronome that everything is following. That's how we did Spart. And when we did Dark Spanish Symphony for the World Soundtrack Awards, I said, Angelo, can I, because it's called Dark Spanish Symphony, for God's sake, can I add an acoustic guitar on this? Yeah. And he said, good idea, do it. And so that's what you hear is a string orchestra, a real string orchestra this time, playing these parts more or less, slightly altered but whatever, with a nylon string Spanish guitar player playing along with it. And once again, I think a little percussion, timpani or something for drama. But that's the story.
Right. That's cool. That is really cool. Yeah. You um worked again with David on Fire Walk with Me,
Yes,
the
yes,
movie that followed
yes,
about a year
yes,
after
yes,
Twin
yes,
Peaks finished. Um,
yes.
Now I have to say to you, Kinney, right, listening to that soundtrack album of Fire Walk with Me, um, it is, and I'm not being biased here, but it's my favorite movie soundtrack album. I absolutely
Wow.
love
Well,
I
that
love the selection of songs on there. I just think it's the unique mood. It's one of my favorites.
well,
Really is. Yeah.
it's kind of jazzy.
Yes,
It's
it
more
is. Yeah,
jazzy.
yeah.
And in fact, that was a live 5 or 6 piece band. I mean, in other words, I remember playing on that. Angelo may have played piano live, and I played synth live. And I think it's Grady Tate playing drums. And I know it was the only time I ever worked with a very famous jazz bass player named Buster Williams, who played with Miles and Coltrane and all that. Buster Williams is the bass player. And I know the trumpet player is a guy who I didn't know at the time and has now become a close friend of mine because he lives in Westchester near Jim Hines. And I think there was a saxophone player, and I don't remember who it is. I'm sorry, I don't remember. But uh, that was a live jazz. And then later, for Jimmy Scott's, little Jimmy Scott's recording, he brought in his own band. I was there to play synthesizer and to, add stuff if necessary, but he brought in his own trio to play there. Uh, um, and I think it was a quartet because I remember he brought in a very good vibes player because I used to play vibes, so I remembered that. In fact, on the Twin Peaks soundtrack, there is a cut called orange, something about juiced, all juiced up, or something about that. Orange, something about orange juice.
I got it. I got
Uh,
it. I got it. Freshly squeezed.
Square freshly squeezed. That's
Yeah.
it. That's
Yeah.
it. That's it.
Freshly
Freshly
squeezed, it was
squeezed.
called.
There's
Yeah. Yeah.
an extensive vibraphone, quote unquote,
Yeah.
vibraphone solo that's actually
Yeah. Yeah.
me on on a
I
synthesizer.
was, yeah. That's cool. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I took sort of a little, vibes go down to the F below middle C. That's their lowest note. There's no such thing as a vibes, to my knowledge, that goes lower than that. I played a little lower, just so that if somebody would, oh, that's not really a vibes, right? Because if you play that E flat or that D down there, that's not part of the instrument. Anyway, but then later when they put out I'll never forget this, when they put out the sheet music that you could buy, and somehow or another I had it and I lost it, and I don't know what happened to it, but it was a completely improvised vibe solo. And when they put out the sheet music, somebody wrote the whole damn thing out. It's the only time anybody's ever like transcribed a solo, like I was Miles or Coltrane, transcribed a solo that I played. But they did on that thing, on Freshly Squeezed, right?
I know. I remember the scene that was used for as well. I can
Right,
visualize it now
right,
with
right,
with
right. Well, that's
Audrey.
that's me. That's me on a Roland synthesizer playing a
And so
vibe solo.
it evokes the images as well. When
Right,
you see it,
right.
yeah, you can hear it. Yeah. Well,
But
that's
but
pretty
when we
cool.
did
Yeah.
but when we did Fire Walk with Me, that's an actual vibes player, a very good
Ah,
vibes player named Jay Hogarth. Anyway,
right. The opening theme to Fire Walk with Me. Um,
yes, yes,
very, very moody, beautiful.
yes,
Sort of
yes,
builds up. Are
yeah,
you on that as well? Are you
yes,
Yeah,
yes, yes.
yeah.
If I don't Angelo also played on that. He didn't
Yeah,
always play live. I mean, usually it
yeah.
was just me, but sometimes he would play. And I
Mm.
think I don't remember whether he played piano or he played Rhodes or whatever. But yes, I am on that. Yes. I think Vinnie Bell is playing guitar, who
Oh,
later
yeah.
played on a lot of Twin Peaks. I
There
can't
is
really
a
honestly.
I'm sort of trying to hear. I'm trying to sort of recall it in my head. The song, the opening song to Fire Walk with Me,
Yeah, yeah,
and
it's a jazzy.
it's quite slow. Yeah, yeah.
The trumpet
Mm.
player is playing with what they call a harmon mute, which is something that Miles
That's
used to
right.
do.
Yeah, yeah. It's got a mute on it. Yeah, that's
Right,
right. Yeah, yeah,
right,
yeah.
right,
They
right,
give you that kind
right.
of raspy sound. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly right.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, he's sort of playing more of the lead, really. The trumpet's kind of guy,
Yes,
sort of more
yes, yes.
lead instrument. And then there's
Yeah.
moody synths. I guess
Well,
that
then
might be
that's
where you
me.
could. That's you.
Then that's me. Yeah,
Maybe you
probably. Yeah,
can. Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, that's good to know, though. It's nice to know when you're hearing it. It's nice to connect the musician with the songs because often, they'll say who played on it, but they won't sort of say which particular part they played on a track.
yeah, but
You never really know. You can't sort of like associate what person's playing what. If you know what I mean.
yeah, but
Yeah, I know
that's
that's
for the
quite a common
list.
thing, but yeah,
The listener is supposed to figure that out.
yeah. I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Right.
yeah, but it's nice to know. It's nice to put it, to get an idea now. So when I listen to those songs now again, I'll be going, there he is. I'll be
Right. Right. Okay.
now I know
Good.
where Kinney is on it.
Good.
Yeah,
Good.
good to
Good.
know. Good to know. Yeah, and so will my listeners as well because they might not know that either.
Right.
But
Right. Right.
uh, so I've got to ask you, Kinney, did you outside of you working with David, did you follow his work, as a viewer, either before
Yeah.
or
You mean
before
you
Twin
mean
Peaks and
you
afterwards?
mean watch the other movies? Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
remember
yeah.
I remember telling him we came in to do a commercial. Probably we did some for Barilla Pasta. I remember doing, and I had just seen Fire Walk with Me, which, or was it, or was it? Lost Highway. I played on one or two sessions on Lost Highway, but I'm not sure whether what they used and what they didn't use. But at any rate, and I said, and neither of those movies got great reviews, as you know. And I said, David, I thought those movies that I think it was Firewalk with Me had a lot to say about the nature of evil in the world, and it does exist. And anyway, that's I think he appreciated the fact that I said that. I don't know. I mean, we talked, quite a bit. I remember him telling me he used to be. I said, "Well, are you a musician? Were you ever a musician?" He said, "Well, I used to play trumpet in the high school, I believe." So that told me a lot, actually. Uh, but he seemed to appreciate that I told him that it had interesting things to say about the nature of evil. That's what I recall.
I mean,
And then, excuse me, and
no,
then
it's okay.
later, I did two different series of the music of David Lynch concerts in L.A. with Angelo and David. He was there both. David was there both times. Um, uh, Both were at the a place called the what's it? I want to say Acme. That's not what it's called. Ace. The Ace Hotel in L.A. has a an old movie. They basically, I understand, bought an old movie theater that had been owned by like Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford or something like that, and that's what they did the concerts there. And I did that. I guess it was 2 years in a row, or twice. Went out to L.A. to play with Angelo. And I say with David. David was in the audience. He didn't actually play on the stage, but yeah, we did all the Twin Peaks stuff. And I don't know if we did Firewalk with Me. I don't think so. But anyway, yeah. And
That must be
I watched and
yeah,
I watched all the other David Lynch movies. And
yeah.
like I said, as going back to that story with the bass guitar sample, he, I'll tell you another story. I got a small award at a film for my own composition at a at a film festival in Asbury Park, New Jersey. And who was there but not Diane Ladd. Diane Ladd was I think she's gone now, but Laura Dern's mother, right? And she was receiving an award, and I got a music composition. It's on the back here, on the wall here. Anyway, um, and I went up to Diane Ladd. I said, "You don't know me, but I worked with David Lynch on Twin Peaks," and she said, "David Lynch was the best director I ever worked with." She said this to me apropos of just saying, I mean, you talk about a woman who was in Chinatown, for God's sake, like one of the greatest movies ever made, and she's saying that about David. That says a lot, I think. Yeah.
Of course, her daughter worked with David a lot,
Yes,
Laura
she
Dern.
did. Yeah.
Long
I never met
association with.
her. I never met
Uh,
her.
yeah, she's had a long association with David. She's been in many of his films and stuff. Yeah, even up to the last Twin Peaks he did. She had quite a big role
Right.
in that too.
which
So
which
yeah,
I didn't really, other than them reusing some of our old tracks. I don't think I did anything. Angelo only did a few pieces of original new music for that, and I think he played all the parts himself. I don't think I had anything to do with it. That's the way I recall it, anyway.
yeah. Um, so currently, Kinney, is there any projects you can tell us about that you're working on?
Yeah, I just finished a movie score myself for a director with whom I've worked many times, a guy named Tom Whitus. And the movie, you can find it on YouTube. It's now on YouTube. It's called Valley of the Shadow. If you search Valley of the Shadow Whitus, Whitus, it'll come up immediately. And it's a Western. and it was a lot of fun because he filmed it in West Virginia, not West Virginia standing in for Colorado, basically. And he because in West Virginia there was a bunch of cabins that were either literally from the 1850s or reproductions of that were part of what they called Jackson's Mill, as in Stonewall Jackson. This was Stonewall Jackson's childhood, or where he was raised, home. And they've preserved it. And therefore it was available, and so they shot there. And the reason I bring that up is because Tom asked me, he knew I had recently acquired an accordion. I'm by no means a great accordion player, and it's a lot harder than it looks as a keyboard player. You figure, well, it's got a keyboard. How hard can it be? Moving that bellows is a whole nother art in itself. Plus, there's all those buttons. But I learned. He said there's a scene in a church or outside a church where I would like you to play accordion, and I play Amazing Grace, and I suggested Rock of Ages. As if you're evoking and that is actually in the record in the film. I went there to West Virginia to film it with all of them, and I used a button accordion that a friend of mine loaned me. But playing a button accordion is a lot different than playing a piano accordion. So I just faked it on the button accordion, and then later dubbed all the parts with a piano accordion. But you hear and see me playing Rock of Ages and Amazing Grace on this movie, Valley of the Shadow, and it's a good movie. I recommend. I think it's one of the better things I've done, and that Tom Whitus and I have done together. He also, by the way, when we got to the end of the movie, and I won't give away because it'd be give away a major plot point, but there's a cute scene, if that's the right word, between a young man and a young woman, and he asks her if she's going to be around when he gets back from hunting, and she says maybe, and that's the end of the movie. And I said to Tom, we should write a song called Maybe, and that should be the closing song of the movie. And by damn, Tom Whitus, within an hour, emails me back a complete set of lyrics for this thing. And I wrote it basically instantaneously, and then we recorded it. And that's what you hear, the song Maybe, which I think is a nice song. That's on that movie. That's something I've done recently. Yeah.
Well, Kinney, I just wanted to say how much I've enjoyed talking to you
Well, thank you.
and hearing all
Thank
your
you.
experiences and your working with David and all the other things you've done. It's been a real joy talking to you. I appreciate
Oh,
that
great.
very much.
I had a good time too.
Right, so this is Kinney. Kinney. This is the last sort of little bit we're showing. It's Kinney showing me the the certificate he got for working on Twin Peaks there. Um, so that's really cool. That's 1990s Grammy Awards, as you can see, and that Kinney Landrum. If you want to go slightly down, Kinney, drop a bit. There, that Kinney Landrum has participated as a musician. There you go. It's rather nice. You said you got the record there as well, a gold disc there as well, Kinney, have you? Yeah, of the soundtrack. There you go. Right, so there's the soundtrack to. Can you go in a little bit, Kinney? You think? Because so I can read the bit underneath. I know it might be a bit tricky that. Um, yeah, it's a bit hard to see because there's reflection there, but it's
Oh,
just crediting people there, I think. And then you've got the cassette of it and the CD of the original soundtrack album. So
not
that's really good.
not quite as good as not quite as good as a real gold record, but there you
It would be
go.
like, yeah, gold disc would be fantastic, wouldn't
Right, exactly.
it?
Right.
But the next best thing, I guess, Kinney, it's still nice to
Yep.
have it like
Yep.
that, isn't it? Framed and everything. Yeah.
Yep.
So there you are. It's nice to know that you are, you played a part in that, you know? That's
Yep.
really cool. Um,
Okay, I'm
that music's
closing
gone
down.
down,
Now. How's that?
yeah, that music's gone down in history, as you well know. So every
Yep.
time people hear that theme, it evokes some emotion or other, you know? Yeah.
Right.
So, thanks, Kinney, for showing those things. That's great.
Okay. All right.
All right. All right, guys.
Thank
Well,
you.
I appreciate that very much, Kinney. Until next time, guys. We'll see you very soon. Take care now. Bye bye.